Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on urban sustainability. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. Rob and Mr. David Smith. First, I would like to give chance Mr. Rob Enderley.
Today's topic is sustainability and urban development. Is that what it is, David? Yeah. Okay. Well, so post the Hawaiian fire, I think sustainability and urban development just took on a different meaning. Typically we talk about sustainability in terms of large scale earth impacts. The idea of reducing waste, reducing energy, moving to clean energy, doing things that sustain the planet. But the fire in Hawaii reminds us there's another aspect of sustainability, and that's survival, and making sure that you are building so that your municipality will survive an event. And certainly we see some parallels between Ukraine and Maui in terms of the type of destruction that's going on, even though the cause is different. So the need for both countries, because Ukraine rebuilds as their buildings are destroyed, only to see in many cases the buildings get destroyed again. And we also see, because we've had wildfires going on all over the world for some time now, and I've got several of them around me. I was spending yesterday kind of hiding from the smoke that's located here, and the fact is we've had several towns destroyed over the years here and rebuilt. But you go back through those towns, they were pretty much rebuilt the way that they were before they burned out. And in other words, there's an effort to restore the town the way it once was. But that's problematic if the town the way it once was is not protected against another similar event. And these events are going to happen more often. And it's not like lightning. Lucky lightning is like lightning, where they say it never strikes the same place twice. Lightning does and will strike the same place twice. But fires will definitely recur. If it happened once, it can and will happen again. And same thing with other types of events, tsunamis, weather-based tsunamis. They're not isolated. They don't just happen once and never happen again. If they happen once, they will happen again. And Hawaii had an alarm system that was set up for the kinds of events they typically have, and yet when they had the fire, that alarm system, the alert system, wasn't turned on. More important, they had monitoring on their power lines. And the monitors picked up the fact that power lines were down and grounded and likely causing fires. But all they did is report. In other words, there was no action to turn the power off from the lines before the fires were ignited. The power companies popped up and said, well, the reason we didn't do that is a lot of people have medical gear that's connected to power. And if we turn those off, that medical gear will fail, and maybe some of them will die. Well, I guarantee when they burned to death, they certainly died. So the goal there by the power company to protect the power flow and not protect against the fires resulted in the pretty much complete wipeout of one of the major cities in Hawaii, the original capital of Hawaii. So part of what we also have to do is we have to apply technology to the rebuild so that whatever destroyed the facility, building, city before has a harder time doing that in the future. In 1903, when California had the great earthquake, there's a lot of discussion whether building codes initially or eventually changed. I've seen some articles that suggested that building codes actually got a little weaker immediately after, but eventually they changed so that buildings had to be built to handle a class 7 earthquake, which is fairly severe. Earthquake measurements are algorithmic as they increase, and so each number is 10 times greater than the prior one. So 7 is pretty powerful. And so the buildings have subsequently held up against earthquakes. Some of the freeways not so much, but the buildings have held up against future earthquakes far better than they did in 1903. And of course, in San Francisco, it was problematic. A lot of San Francisco was built on ground that would liquefy in an earthquake, making building more difficult and requiring that they drive pillars down into bedrock to ensure the buildings, the skyscrapers shouldn't just keel over in an earthquake. And so part of building sustainably is not just handling energy. It's not just keeping waste to a minimum, but it's ensuring your building codes will create structures that will handle likely events. And right now, in some areas of likely events may be war, and other areas, in fact, most of the world's likely events will probably require weather-based events, man-made or other disasters. In fact, here with regard to fires, the majority of fires that we're dealing with were man-made. People that threw cigarettes out of their windows, didn't put a campfire out properly, or illegally camping, and as a result, they had made a mistake and started a fire, and some of those fires actually take out the people that started them. So in the end, a sustainability program really needs to be holistic. The goal isn't just global sustainability. The goal is also local sustainability, and part of that sustainability is making sure that you sustain, in other words, that you survive, your citizens survive, and you've got a healthy environment. I know on this program we often point pretty heavily to Finland, and the reason for that is Finland is ranked first in the happiness index, but they've probably done the most to really focus on sustainability as it relates to the general population and thinking about it from the standpoint of creating a better living, working environment for its people. And I think at the end, and then I'll pass to David, that's really where a lot of these sustainability efforts should be focused. First and foremost, to help people have a better, higher quality life, be safer, be less stressed, have an easier time getting to and from work, or perhaps an easier time working from home. Those are all the things that would factor into a sustainability program, which also should include the reduction of waste and the production of clean energy. But it doesn't do any good to have low waste and clean energy if your house burns to the ground and you're left homeless or you're left dead as a result. And so another part of the sustainability program really needs to be looking at your build processes, your building permit process, your requirements. And making sure that when you are building, and if you do have buildings, to retrofit so that they can handle these kinds of threats. Out in Florida, for instance, here in the United States, the insurance companies have pulled out of large sections of the state because it's just too risky for them. Insurance is supposed to be something that protects you against a unlikely event. That's how insurance works economically. But if the event is likely, you can't get insurance because that's going to be a loss. You're not going to pay $5,000 against a $2 million potential liability if that potential liability is certain that insurance companies would go out of business on the first day. And that's why they're pulling out of Florida. And they pulled out of California before, and fire insurance is unavailable in large portions of my state for that very reason. If you're building in an area that has a high fire risk, you're not going to be able to get insurance. Certainly not affordable insurance if you get it, and not insurance at all if you don't. And so then if you're going to build in that area, that behooves you to build so that the house will survive the event, and therefore you don't necessarily need the insurance. In fact, I often question in these areas whether people shouldn't, instead of paying for insurance, be paying to harden their homes against the event that they're anticipating so the event doesn't occur. Because even with insurance, one, it doesn't pay 100%. So you're still out of quite a bit of money. But two, if your house goes up, you're still homeless for a period of time. Could be months, could be years, and so protecting you against that may be a higher priority. So as we go through these events, these global warming, climate change events, it behooves us to build so that the structures survive, so that the citizens are alive. They're not just healthy; they're living, and their homes are standing. And so I think with Maui and Ukraine, we've got examples where sustainability probably needs to go beyond just the green efforts and really talk about protecting the structures, protecting the people, and making sure we're ready for that next event, be it war, which is also being driven by global climate change, or the more direct effects of high winds, fires, floods, tsunamis, and other events that are likely to come to disrupt our lives and destroy our property. And now I'll pass to David.
Thank you, Rob. And thank you, Dr. Sharif, for bringing the graphic up. This is really a great view to begin to look at where urban sustainability fits and plays. Urban sustainability really refers to the actions that particularly regulatory agencies make and guiding principles, and to improving and building our cities and our communities without continuing to always use our resources. And it builds along multiple paths. You have both economic sustainability, economy sustainability, and you have social sustainability. And as you can see, kind of from this chart, they all kind of go together, and it's the intersection of these which is really the definition of urban sustainability. And there's different areas of interest that can be used to increase and affect urban sustainability. Rob has done an excellent job of laying out multiple of them. But for example, in the financial industry area, the principle of ESG investing is very much used today to encourage the development and investment in the development of sustainable technologies that can be used for urban sustainability. And we're seeing more and more developments, like here in the Austin area, we have multiple developments that are promoting themselves as sustainable living, which translates to green living, with underground piping and stuff for cooling. Most of the communities now have adapted standards that anytime you build a new house, you have to plant new trees, even if there's trees on the lot, to begin to increase the coverage there. And we're seeing these increase in heightened standards for sustainability in all the social, economic, and environmental terms. And the goal is, how do we deliver and lower the urban carbon footprint? How do we reduce the greenhouse gas emission? Can we target resources and construction, operation, and management of this urban environment? And how can we put in place systems to deal with it? One of probably the biggest challenge in urban sustainability, like it actually is in many industries too, is it is very difficult to measure. And how can you put KPIs and everything around urban sustainability? For example, if you look at the circles on the graphic and see how they fit, the three pillars are really difficult to manage, each of them. Each requires a different set of indicators and measurements, methods, and also a extremely large pool of specializations in science and businesses to be able to account and put metrics around it. If you go back and look at what the National Academy of Science said a couple of years ago on urban sustainability, they said that the planet has biophysical limits. Other than the solar energy that comes directly from the sun, everything we have on our planet is limited. And most of them will not replenish themselves, so there won't be more after we exhaust them. And for example, land use change and habitat and biodiversity loss are some of the big impacts of it. One of their other key points is that human natural systems are tightly intertwined. So human cultures are connected globally. The relationship to the people and their interactions increase much more in cities than they do in the past in a rural environment. And so it's important to plan, urban and sustainability with really a global and diverse mindset, understanding it's many different cultures, it's many different types of ecosystems that have to come together. And urban inequalities really goes a long ways to helping undermine sustainability efforts and making them harder and harder to achieve. If you can't put enough food on your family's table, building a green, sustainable environment is one of the last things on your mind. And so you see in many places of the world in urban sustainability, you see severe economic problems, political, class, social inequalities in this environment. And these make it very difficult to educate and have people practice the important principles of urban sustainability. Finally, cities are highly interconnected today. And even though they're planned individually, they have to interact with other cities and in their states and their nations. So a urban sustainability model really has to have its foundation and demands new models of governance, new models of institutions and innovation partnerships that can really deal with the fact that urban sustainability is a system of systems problem. And it has to address the multiple type of places, stakeholders, and decision makers that really have to be brought to bear for urban sustainability to work. And there's many projects we see, there's many opportunities that are there. But just as a couple of last comments to let it go back to Rob again a couple minutes, is it's estimated that nearly 70% of the world's population will live in cities by 2050. 70% in cities by 2050. And the types of projects we're talking about that can be used and applied to that are just the tip of the iceberg of what is needed and what do we need to do to fix the challenges we have in this domain. And Dr. Sharif, I think the simple chart is almost too simple for a complex issue like urban sustainability, but it is one that we need to use innovation. We need to involve all people, the technopolis, in the solution. And again, urban sustainability is not limited to one city. It's not limited to one region, one country. It truly is a global problem that we have to deal with. So Dr. Sharif, thank you for letting me have my initial comments.
Thank you, Mr. David Smith. Mr. Rob, when we discuss about sustainabilities, like I want to know personally that how many American peoples has uh, awareness about sustainability, how US actually implementing sustainability in their business and business environment.
Oh, sure. We mentioned this before. Every company, every major company has a chief sustainability officer. I'm not, by the way, I'm not a total fan of this idea of having chief anything focused on a particular area, only because what it often happens is the individual becomes a blame magnet. We mentioned that in an earlier show with the chief diversity officer, which has fallen into disfavor, much like the risk managers fell into disfavor about a decade ago. But most companies have a chief sustainability officer who is focused on aggregating and reporting the company's sustainability efforts and driving sustainability forward. And the question often is for those people, whether or not they've got the authority to drive change, and often they don't. The position is considered a staff, not a line position, which in itself is kind of problematic. Staff positions tend not to have as much voice as the line position has. And the end result is their impact is somewhat nerfed. On the other hand, virtually every company I cover and work with is reporting in excess of $1 billion in revenues tied to their sustainability efforts. So the sum is as much as $3.5 million. So that's real money. That's a significant sum. And as long as you're able to tie revenue to the overall efforts, you can continue to fund the effort. And it's the CEO says that's important, whether they're a sustainability believer. For instance, the Cisco's CEO is a huge sustainability believer and driving his company pretty heavily, but as is HP's. But not every CEO puts it as that high a priority. And in some cases, historically, it's been more of a marketing effort as opposed to an effort to really change how you do things. Now, the sustainability efforts, for the most part, have been focused on things that are kind of easy to fix, like packaging. Been much more difficult to focus on things that are harder to fix, like lithium-ion and batteries, which is a significant pollutant, and it's nasty when you mine it, and it's really nasty when it goes up in fire. In fact, mentioning the fact that my car was just put under a recall because it might burn down my house, I'm very leery of lithium-ion at the moment. So the end result is that the companies tend to go after the low hanging fruit initially. What can we do that doesn't cost us much that might make a difference and look good on the report? Many of the companies initially did stupid things like, okay, we'll plant a tree for resale would make, which one they didn't do for the most part. And number two, planting trees isn't the way to fix the underlying problem. The Republican Party here in the United States, I think, to deal with their sustainability argument, they've been anti-sustainability for a while. Said they're going to plant, I think, 1 trillion trees, something like that, some incredible number of trees to address the global warming problem, global climate change problem. And I don't think there's a single scientist that supports the effort, not to mention the fact they have got the money to do it. So in the end, it is a mix, depending on the company, depending on the organization, between whether they're doing real things, heavy recycling. So pointing at, let's talk about some of the heroes. HP and Dell partnered to do hardware recycling at scale. If you go to an HP recycling center, you will undoubtedly see a lot of Dell hardware being recycled as well. This is the case where the companies cooperated. Often competitors don't cooperate, but Dell and HP did cooperate to drive their joint sustainability goals forward, which I think was a credit to both firms, because when you get two companies combining the resources, they can make a bigger difference than one firm can. And also it helps drive behavior in your customer base, because to make that recycling work, the customers have to turn in the hardware, not just send it to a landfill, which does require a little bit extra work. So in the end, having them both come together on this helps drive the effort forward. HP on the printer side, which is where they have the greatest exposure, they've moved to using sustainable wood sources. So wood that is not coming from old growth forests, but wood that's coming from new growth, so that the forests are replenished while the wood is harvested. So it's much more like a regular crop, and less taking out old growth forests or ancient trees, which would be problematic for paper. They've gone to they're starting to move away from cartridges, which are contributing a lot of plastic to landfills, and moving to printers that use reservoirs instead. And they have an aggressive recycling program for the cartridges as well. They even had a program to see if they could recycle the ink, which I thought was fascinating, but it just wasn't cost effective. Pulling the ink out of paper wasn't viable, and certainly recapturing the ink that was in the cartridges was an interesting idea, but the ink itself isn't all that toxic, and the cost was extreme. But at least they looked at it, and so those are a couple examples of heavy recycling. Over at Cisco, where they're just kind of rabid about this stuff, they do things like they deal with homeless people in any area where they've got a headquarters building. They invest heavily in getting homeless off the streets. So really kind of moving around their recycling stuff, aggressive on recycling. And when they have a customer event, they generally work in sustainability technology into the event and have the customers participate in underlying efforts, so that customers get hands-on experience on it. And all of the companies that I mentioned are driving sustainability down to their partner ecosystems to get the partners to do much of the same thing. And for any of these companies, sustainability and diversity, the programs are in parallel as they're driving them through the partner ecosystems. They're also looking at partners to do something with regard to their employee mix, and ensuring that employee mix matches the demographics outside the demographics they're selling to. So that, which is an important part of diversity. And I think diversity is also an aspect of sustainability, because if you've got large portions of your population that are ethnically disadvantaged, those populations are going to have a harder time executing a sustainability program. As David pointed out, if you're having trouble getting clean water, food, and a decent roof over your head, your priorities in terms of putting stuff in recycling bins are going to be non-existent. And if you see a lot of the homeless camps, they're almost toxic waste nightmares in and of themselves. And so if you can get people in jobs, if you can get people working, then they're more likely to contribute sustainably. They're more likely to support sustainability programs and not be toxic waste dumps in and of themselves. So it's really important to deal with the problem not only physically but economically, so that people are motivated to live in a more sustainable way. Finally, We have a real problem with our political system in that we have, in effect, have one party that's gung-ho with regard to sustainability, really doesn't seem to have a clue how to prioritize it, and another party that's gung-ho and trying to block sustainability. Like I was just watching a program from that party arguing that we need to get back to $1.75 gas because that's what people really want. Regardless of the fact we recognize that petrochemical production is one of the biggest problems we have to overcome to get to address global climate change. And so they're actually actively working against sustainability programs because they think that arguing to the population that, hey, your life can be a lot easier if you just kick the can down the road and let your kids or your kids' kids deal with the underlying problems. Which, I mean, I get that. I certainly understand their underlying arguments, but it's not good for the race and doesn't suggest we as a civilization are going to survive for long. So we're a mixed bag. A lot more companies are heavily focused on sustainability and doing good work, though held back from doing really major things because the cost reward is upside down. Some are more marketing efforts and they're not doing much, but almost everybody's talking to sustainability from some standpoint or another. But our bigger problem is perhaps the disparity in our parties, where one party is actively working against sustainability, which is problematic because no one party stays in power. And sustainability does require a certain amount of investment up front to deal with a problem that may not be critical until off into the future, which is kind of a hard problem it's a hard sale. And if you don't get everybody on board, it's very hard to make progress. And back to David.
Rob, thank you so much. Dr. Sharif, anything you particularly would like me to talk about in this area, or should I just keep going?
We want to know more about industrial sustainability because World Talent Economy Forum, we work more in industry. So how does it work in North America, especially industrial sustainability?
Good questions, Sharif. The system here in North America is evolving tremendously as you look forward to where it goes. And particularly in here, it's going to require a new roadmap, a new way to relook at what are the boundaries for what's the responsibilities of companies, the urban residents, the leadership, what are the other activities that can be used there. There's some that really are very, very interesting if I look at them and try to apply them to industry, because you see their impacts that go across all of the parts of these ecosystems. One of them that's real interesting to me is the concept of vertical forests, vertical farming, and how it can be used in the city. And the principle of it is very, very interesting in that buildings need to be manufactured, factories need to be manufactured with this whole concept of the vertical farming in it, and how that vertical farming can be used. Let's see if I can do this real quickly. It's hard to get industry to begin to understand the importance of some of the urban sustainability, because they're mostly interested in how do I generate value for my shareholders, my stockholders? How can I increase my profits? And some of the sustainability on these does not well support it. Dr. Sharif, this is a great example of what I was talking about just a minute ago with the concept of the vertical forest. This particular one happens to be in Italy. And you can see that the building was 100% designed around the concept of a vertical forest and vertical gardens. And if you look at the rest of the area around that city, you see very little green. And this is one of the ways where some of the urban planners are trying to begin to say, this is a concept that needs to be built into it. I told you here in the Central Texas area in the United States, our urban planners are requiring every new house to plant at least 2 new trees to comply with the local rules and regulations here that go and support the concept of urban sustainability. But if I look at the pure industry side, it has to be built into, you have the goals for sustainability, which have been laid out by the United Nations, the World Economic Forum. Many of the NGOs have put sustainable qualities in. You see sustainability now in the type of funding you can receive when you're going to market. Sustainability is now a very important part of raising money, getting loans and other areas like that. But from a pure corporate view, some of the things that investors are asking now are things: what is your carbon footprint? What are you doing to lower the carbon in the future? What type of renewable fuels and things are you using? How are you looking at power? How are you using water? Are you using sustainable transport? And can sustainable transport help reduce the challenges around this? And we're seeing many more of the people beginning to look at how can I use new technologies to help make this very practical. So, for example, here in the United States, again, in our industry side, there's 2 new approaches that are being applied for the power that's particularly used in manufacturing and other industries and in data centers. Data centers are a tremendously big hog of energy. And so the 2 that we're seeing right now is, one of them is using clean hydrogen power. It still has challenges like we've talked about before, but is growing more and more every day, not only for micro generation power for things like factories and small communities, but also in transportation. Well, I am a fan of what I think will be the hydrogen powered car and truck, which will make great inroads. The other, though, and it's one that I kind of want to highlight, is we're seeing now a multitude of mini nuclear reactors coming out to play in them. And these are actually called, their buzz name is SMRs, which are small modular reactors. And we're seeing them go everywhere in planning stages now. Multiple companies here in the United States have these and being built right now. And they're going from the ones which are appropriate for for example, a data center, about 50 megawatts, all the way up to the largest of the small modular nuclear reactors I've seen is about 400 megawatts. So 400 megawatts could really power large factories. It could power communities. Again, the concept of these modular nuclear reactors, these small nuclear reactors, is to be used in a micro environment and be able to use the power mini and microgrids, which we've talked about many times on your program, Dr. Shreve. And the question you ask on this one is, how quickly do we think that's going to happen? Where do we see the impact of those? And Dr. Shreve, that one's interesting to me because we have used small nuclear reactors for decades. They've been used on spacecrafts, satellites for exploration. They've been used on submarines. They've been used on other ships. They have been used on aircraft carriers, a little bit larger ones. But these modular nuclear reactors, we actually have a large, long history with, and actually a very safe history with them. And most of these are not the design you see of the older commercial powered nuclear reactors, but these are more air cooled ones where you don't have to have the continuing water flow and other things like that to be able to use them. Uh, I can tell you one of the groups that my holding company has been talking to about using some of our products with them is a company called IP3 International, which is building some of these mini reactors. Another company doing it is NuScaler reactors, at which the National Nuclear Regulatory Commission earlier this year actually certified uh, their small 50 megawatts reactor. And there's a lot of potential here, and it just needs to work again with the education of the community, because the education of the community is going that said, anything nuclear is bad. And I don't believe that's the case. This is the greenest source of energy that we have that we can use uh, to do anything with. But that is kind of my, well, Dr. Sharif's called my feedback on some of this type of use in the commercial sector. Mark, why don't you give us your comments?
Glad to do that. I know we're talking about urban sustainability and all along those lines, and I definitely know that even in Durham, there have been a lot of projects that have been dealing with urban farms and other kinds of ways of having urban sustainability, even in this small metropolitan area and all along those kind of areas. But I do know that there's been a lot of push to have some great urban farms and even some that are in confined urban areas, like you mentioned with that garden. There are definitely people that are doing them in their apartment complex. As a matter of fact, one of my neighbors is originally from Brazil, and she and another neighbor, they're actually in another building complex here in the apartment complex that I am part of. They actually have like what I consider a friendly rivalry, because they're literally growing gardens in the front of their apartments and everything. And I think she's vastly winning, even though she just recently had a tree that fell down and everything. But she was growing everything from cucumbers to tomatoes to sunflower plants to a number of other things. So if you think about an apartment complex, that is oftentimes a very small environment, and even the sunflower seed was going up to the second floor and all along those lines. But she was definitely having those crops, and it was very wonderful. She even shared some of them with me on an occasion, so she definitely had a surplus, and sometimes that surplus would be shared with neighbors. Sometimes, as I know Rob and you, David, know, you also have the other neighbors that might want to use the food as well. So she did have some of the friendly rabbits and some of the other ones that might decide to have some of the garden, because they figured if you were growing it, you must be growing it for them. So sometimes they will do that as well. And I'm sure you, Rob, and you, David, can relate to that and all along those lines. And the other thing that I was curious about, and I don't know y'all's thoughts about this, but I was reading a article today, because when we think about urban sustainability, we also think about resources and the resources that are available. And I saw an article earlier today that talked about how in certain parts of the world, I think Middle East and definitely Northern Africa, there are a major shortage of water. We're seeing that even in parts of the United States. I think Arizona, Texas, and a couple of other places were in that conversation. And of course, we as humans are mostly made up of water, and we definitely need water to survive. So that seems to me that would be a major concern as we are looking at the future of the world, because I know a lot of people are concerned about the nature of what we might do to destroy the world in the sense of war and destruction. But I would also be concerned that if there is less water than what we are used to and not enough water to sustain life, that could be problematic, because if you look at the great ocean, it seems like there's plenty of water, but then I'm hearing about a shortage of water, and I'm going like, wait a minute, there's all these great oceans, the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Indian, and a number of other things. So you would think that we would have plenty of water, but apparently there is a shortage and definitely a need for water, and there is definitely some alarms that are being raised, just like there were alarms being raised around climate change as well. But I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about that, because if you're talking about urban sustainability, you definitely need water to help with even the construction of the urban sustainability. But Rob, any thoughts about that? Because like I said, when I saw that article, and I actually mentioned it on Pod TV earlier today, I'm going like, this could be a major issue and a major concern, even within the nature of urban sustainability. So is this something that we need to be concerned about, this press against the water supply? Because like I said, that was something new to me, and I'm saying that I'm always learning new things. So I was a little bit concerned. And like I said, if we're talking about urban sustainability, whether it's in Bangladesh or whether it's in the United States, I would think water would be a major issue.
Well, it is. The three things that you have to really worry about with regard to civilization is water, food, and medicine. And water is, it's really what we're talking about, is shortage of clean water. There's no real shortage of water, but water that you can drink can be problematic, and the oceans are not full of water that you can drink. It's you have to put in place desalination plants to make that water drinkable and usable. And water transport is problematic. It's heavy. And we've certainly seen that with our efforts to put out the forest fires, the various fires we've had, Maui being most recent. We do not have the ability to move enough water to just take out a fire. We can create fire lines. We can perhaps keep the fire from spreading. But even then, in the major fire events, we've got large fires. For instance, I say we've got large fires that are still like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% contained. And last month we had a bunch of fires that were 0% contained and just spreading very rapidly. And helicopters, converted cargo planes, even some converted passenger planes, just really weren't designed to carry this kind of material and that operate as a bomber. They've been converted to do it, but they're not ideal. And from time to time, we start losing pilots that are flying them because the planes aren't exactly cutting edge military. And so they're able to fly through smoke and flames. Even though that's their purpose, is somewhat limited by the technology that's on them. And so in the end, our ability to, one of our major problems as we focus on global climate change, is how to move water in large quantities inexpensively, clean water in large quantities inexpensively. Because the other thing you want to do in a fire, you don't want to be using salt water to put out a fire, because that'll wipe out all the vegetation and effectively salt the land, so you can't grow crops on it. And so salt water, even though it's very plentiful, if you're fighting a fire, it's not what you want to use unless you're fighting a fire on a boat, in which case it doesn't matter because of the contamination the salt puts in the soil. So in the end, yeah, we've got a significant water problem. If you go to parts of the United States, you'll find that we have a lot of open petrochemical wells in places like Pennsylvania, which are now leaking into groundwater and contaminating the water, contaminating the air as well. The high measures of arsenic, though, in local water, which is problematic because arsenic's a poison. And once again, even though the water looks clean and clear and doesn't taste bad, it'll kill you if you drink it. So which is also kind of problematic. So in the end, it's really a fight for clean water. And maybe there will be in the future, we'll all have to have reverse osmosis filtration machines and regular sampling for water, because we are aggressively contaminating the water sources we have still. And so at some particular point, we may end up in that Mad Max world where everybody's fighting for what little water is left. And that, of course, would be a problematic outcome.
No, that you said that, I was just thinking that I know it's happened in New York. Matter of fact, I think it happened last month in New York with lead contamination. And we just actually recently here in Durham had 5 of our parks. Yeah, 5 of our parks that were kind of closed because of elevated levels of lead. So I imagine that is also an issue in the whole notion of urban sustainability, because a lot of times when we're talking about things and trying to be sustainable, we definitely want to be healthy as well. So I know that there were 5 major parks here in Durham, North Carolina. And like I said, there was the ones in New York that are being tested for, and in other parts of the world. So that is an issue. And I know that there was even recently a a housing project that was closed because of asbestos. So they were actually closed because of asbestos. So whether it's lead or whether it's asbestos.
Well, asbestos is a different problem. We used asbestos for insulation for years, and so a lot. And my sister-in-law remodeled houses of that area, and she died of pancreatic cancer. Not a good way to go. As a result of asbestos. So the asbestos is really nasty stuff, and you want to stay away from old buildings. In fact, there's an argument that says, if you got an old building, you just leave it the hell alone. You don't want to disturb it. Asbestos is fairly safe if at rest. It gets dangerous when you start mucking it up and putting asbestos into the air. And so there are arguments to say for older buildings, maybe you shouldn't remodel them. Maybe you should just leave them alone and work around them. And at some point, if you're getting asbestos in the air, then you just abandon the building. Though I'm not sure how that practical that is. But in the end, yes, a lot of our practices using lead pipes, using asbestos for water, using asbestos for insulation, things that we did up and through the 50s, is coming back to haunt us now, coming up almost a century later. We're having to deal with those mistakes. And so certainly looking forward, when we're picking the materials we're going to use to build with, we need to do a better job of picking materials that won't become toxic over time.
Oh yeah, no doubt about that. David and you, Rob, and everything. How much do we play even in urban sustainability into our, because we mentioned with lead, but I would argue that even our personal things can add to our issues with urban sustainability, because I was just earlier mentioning the water shortage, and I know that I am a fan of having clean clothes, and I know that sometimes I am probably overwashing and all in that space. As a matter of fact, y'all might have heard earlier the washing machine running and all along those lines. So I sometimes wonder if we don't sometimes cause our own problems and our own issues if we are adding to the situation, because I want to say that they recommend that you maybe wash maybe once a week or maybe a couple of other times in that kind of average. But I know some people that might even wash on a daily or on a semi-daily basis, and even for other parts of the world, they may do the river washing and other kinds of washing that is not using the washing machines. But I'm wondering how much, and particularly in the West, we play into the problem with some of these things that we should be doing.
There's a breakthrough in washing machines. The Europeans are doing now, at least with regard to energy use, moving to a heat pump washing machine. In fact, General Electric just came out with, if you're in the market for a washing machine, General Electric just came out with a washer dryer combination that uses a heat pump, plugs into 110, not 220, uses a ton less energy. You don't have to vent it, so you're not dealing with the global warming issues of using natural gas for heat. It's very economical to run. It's not a cheap date. It'll cost you about what a washer and dryer would cost, but it's a single unit. And so from a convenience standpoint, you just put your load in and it comes out dry. So that's a lot better than having to work between the two products. But from the standpoint of sustainability, it uses a lot less energy, doesn't require vents. You're not dealing with the fire hazard of vent clogs. This has the filter on the side of it, and it is much more sustainable in terms of operation. The Europeans have been using heat pumps, washer and dryers for a while now. They have been popular in the United States because they tend to be smaller. But there is a move by the industry to create machines that are far more sustainable than the machines that preceded. In fact, I'm thinking of yanking out my washer and dryer and replacing it with one of the GE units for that very reason. So we're making a little bit of progress. The issue with regard to detergents in washers and dryers polluting the water had a lot to do with the use of enzymes a while back, and the enzymes were kind of problematic. They stayed resident for a while, and you really didn't want them floating around as something you might drink or might make it into groundwater. So the use of enzymes has been somewhat curtailed in detergent. I do know that a lot of Chinese detergents are making it to this market, and the Chinese detergents are at least allegedly using materials that can be toxic, and so you want to watch your source of laundry detergent so you're not creating a problem. At least I've seen a number of flags in this. I haven't done the research to see if it's as big a problem as people are saying, But I have noticed that there are a series of flags on Chinese detergents that you have to watch out for as well. So you can use it regularly. But like anything else, if you operate in moderation, you're probably fine. If you do find yourself using the equipment much more than you should be using it, well, then you're wasting money, and you're working against sustainability. So just stop doing that.
Yep, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Hey, David, just really quickly, one of the things I was curious about, because I was listening to what you were showing with the urban villages, and I mentioned the gardener friends that I have here in this area and all along those lines. But, during the pandemic, we saw a lot of apartments, and not just apartments, but we also saw a lot of educational buildings and industrial buildings that were not being used to their maximum capacity. So I saw what you were showing, which was more of a house kind of business. But are there any kind of industrial buildings, particularly in the West, that are looking at maybe even having a garden in the office? I can imagine that in RTP, it would be great if they had some gardens.
Quite a few that do that, but some of the best examples not in the United States.
Okay.
Because we tend not to see this as a problem. Most of the citizens here says it's every place else but not here. But if you go to Bangkok, I don't know if either of you have flown into Bangkok, Thailand. They have some real innovative programs. I love their transportation system. From the airport into the city, there was a 5-level road with different express options and trains, and a different level for delivery vehicles and things. But what they've done a lot in Bangkok is they've built these elevated train tracks and these other things like that. What they've done, though, that I think is really innovative is they are now turning those into green space. They're planting trees on them. They're planting other plants on them. They're doing part of that. They're trying to increase that to create more of an environment for not only sustainability, but to help promote more rain, more different things that the changes in the climate promote. You go and look at some other places. Australia, traditionally very dry. They have some very innovative approaches there where if you go to many of the rooftops of the planet. Here in Austin, we probably have half a dozen warehouses where they've planted vegetation on top. It keeps it cooler. The problem you have with that is when you have times like we are now, we're on our 42nd or 43rd day in a row with temperature above 100. And we're in pretty severe water restrictions right now for watering. I have to water by hand only one night a week. I can't water using anything else. So the problem with those type of developments when you're in extremes like we tend to be in extreme now is a lot of that vegetation's dying right now because they are prohibited from watering it and other things like that. So, they're doing what they can do. One of them not far from me is doing something real innovative. They are going out to the wastewater facility and they're trucking in gray water from the wastewater facility, and they're using that to water that. That actually would be one of the neatest things that we see. When my son was in Scouts before he got his Eagle Scout, he had to propose a couple of projects, and he proposed one and actually went and talked to some of our city council members of requiring in new neighborhoods, not just a water pipe, not just a natural gas pipe, not just a sewage pipe, but a gray water pipe that would circulate gray water back around to use for things like watering yards, flushing toilets, and things where you really don't need the treated water to use in things like that. And that would also go towards urban sustainability. Yes, the infrastructure cost was high to do that, but the city councilman that he went and spoke to as part of him getting that merit badge was actually receptive to the idea, because we do have a crazy liberal city council here in Austin that has hurt the city more than I can tell you. But you can use approaches like that. The problem is our existing infrastructure doesn't support these well. Our policies, our rules and regulations do not support this well. And it would have a big impact if it could have wider scale adoption. The problem with urban sustainability, the problem with global sustainability is you don't need just a demonstration. You need wide scale adoption of the technologies, wide scale adoption of the approaches. And if we truly are going to go towards urban sustainability, that's what we need to do across all those factors we talked about before. It has to come from the regulatory, it has to come from the commercial sector. The governments have to begin to come together. Education and science has to come up to it. And yes, like many of the things we've talked about in this area, the general population needs to be educated. If they don't see it as a problem, it's not going to get done. And that's a challenge. But guys, I'm going to go ahead and jump off. You can kind of see, I still don't have air conditioning repaired yet. And it's in the upper 90s in the house right now. And you can kind of see beads of sweat are pouring off of me. So I'm going to jump off, guys. Thank you so much for letting me be on this session today.
No problem. I definitely can understand having to protect yourself and all along those lines. Hey, Rob, one of the things I was curious about is
Good luck, David.
talking about green architecture and all along those lines is that one of the things that I've observed is that a lot of times when people are seeing the green architecture, they love the benefit of it. They love the support that it can bring. They love the beauty of it. But then sometimes we get stuck in our particularly Western ways of liking the taller buildings and everything and not always thinking about the green nature of things. I know that even at the Cultural Arts Center that I work at, they were part of a green initiative and they planted trees and everything. And those trees are growing nicely and we're adding some shade because there was definitely an open parking lot that was in front of the building. So they add a little bit of shade and protection. They also added some beauty to the area as well. But then we just had, just like he had heat, we had torrential storms that were like happening and some high winds that were about 2 or 3 days ago. So some of those lovely, beautiful trees also have fallen down. I mentioned that with the neighbor that does the garden and everything. So I sometimes think that people are overly afraid of what could happen if you plant these nice trees, because if you plant them and they grow up to a certain level and then a hurricane, and we are in the hurricane season here in North Carolina and up and down the southeast, that beauty can then be knocked out and all in that space. Because I do know that is something going on. I was just talking to my friend Jatovi, whose kids are out for the second day because they're still trying to adjust to the impact of the storm and everything. So even though his house wasn't impacted, other houses were impacted, and there are still people that are without power. So I sometimes wonder if that is a concern with the green economy, that some people are loving the beauty of nature, but they also know the force of nature as well.
Well, so recognize that when you're talking about building a sustainable building, it doesn't have a lot to do with landscape. So the sustainable building really has to do with how the building is constructed, to use sunlight for heat, have solar for power, use in other words, use the physical design of the building to limit the amount of energy you have to use to heat and cool it. And that really has to do with how you direct the building, how you design the windows, whether or not you have heat retention elements within the building that can capture the heat during the day and then use that heat at night, or whether they're using geothermal for HVAC, which allows for a far less expensive way to heat and cool the building. When you're talking about landscaping, what has to happen with regard to landscaping, what we're trying to do is create the kinds of problems that you have in places like Phoenix and Las Vegas, where you have massive areas of cement and concrete, which become huge heat sinks and can actually change the weather in the area for the worst, and change something that might be subtropical into something that's more like a desert. So that's where the landscaping really comes in. It helps put moisture back in the air. It helps with the natural cooling in the environment, and it keeps you from spiraling out of control when you have a high temperature event, which can be problematic in areas where they've got a lot of concrete. New York, major cities right now have way too much concrete. So if you go to some place like Finland, they can handle major weather shifts much more easily because they've not put in these, and they've ripped out where they had them, these large cement areas, which superheat the air and actually make it warmer than it should be. And instead, the plants make it cooler than it otherwise would be, and so it creates a more sustainable environment. But for the most part, sustainable building has to do with house with the structure of the building itself, how you're designing to lower the costs of heating and cooling and power.
No, I see Sharice is back, but I guess the question I asked
We probably need to wrap because we're over
yeah,
the hour.
I know we're wrapping and everything. The question I was going to, and we can bring this up on another show, but I sometimes wonder about people's aesthetics because some people get caught up in the aesthetics and they see even the one that David was showing earlier and they don't find it as aesthetically pleasing. But I also hear what you're saying because one of my family's dear friends who unfortunately has passed away, I want to say about a year or two ago, was a environmentally sustainable architect. So he was very much into this whole notion of urban sustainability and kind of architecture.
Yeah, it's called you're building against a LEED standard, and so their rankings in terms of how you build the buildings or the homes that allow you to build more sustainable. We have a number of sustainable homes going around us. They just look like modern homes, unless you really looked at the plans and saw what the internals of the house were. They just look like a contemporary house. Some of the more aggressive sustainable building is using things like hay as for insulation in the concrete, and of course we have 3D home building, which often uses a slurry of concrete and some type of local material, be it hemp, be it hay, to create rigidity within the walls and form a much better insulation barrier than otherwise would be the case with just straight concrete. There's a lot that goes into building a sustainable building, but we probably should wrap because we're over the time.
No, I agree. And like I said, just a big shout out to Freeman Ledbetter. That was his name. And he was, like I said, a family friend that was into urban sustainability. It was into particularly the solar power side of it and all along those lines. And I think his company may still be in existence. And I was trying to remember the name of it. But the next time we talk about it, I will have that at my hand and acceptable and able to talk about it in more detail. But Sharif, I'm turning it over to you because like Rob said, we're over time and definitely always glad to pop in. I know I popped in late because I didn't get to know it's still late, but always glad to come in and enjoy the conversations with Rob and whoever else is on here.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's session. Thank you.